Good morning, everyone. I am super excited to see you, and I'm thankful that you could join us this morning for the last part of an 8-part webinar series. My name is Sara Werf. I am the MDE Academic Standards Math Specialist, and I am excited to talk to you about the last thing we're talking about. As always, I'll be sharing everything that you see in this webinar. It's already in folders that there's a bit.ly and a QR code. I'll share this again at the end, but we'll also be putting it in the chat throughout things. Say hi to Kim in the chat and she can get you the things that are there. There's a PLC protocol. There's a ton of links as well as a ton of folders that you will want to make sure that you go and find. MDE, who I work for, has 10 commitments to equity, and this series is really going after number 9, improving the conditions for learning. And we're doing that with the 8 mathematical practices that are in the 2022 standards. And when the standards committee was writing those, we focused on the children of the people that were part of the committee because they were going to be the most impacted by the new set of standards. And we always centered them in our work and thought about what is the learning they will need to do so they can be vibrant members of the community. And so these 8 practices are embedded into the 2022 Minnesota Academic Standards in Math that will be fully implemented in the 27-28 school year, but they're things you can work on now. And one of the things in that document that I'm hoping everybody will go read is what is called the Career, College, and Community Readiness Vision Statement. It sets the vision for where the children of our committee, but all K-12 students in Minnesota, what the hopes of the committee were for them. It was based on research and lots of looking into where we are going. One of the things we looked at is the changes that will happen. This is my mom. I've shared her picture before, and there's been a lot of change in her lifetime. That's her first phone and her current phone in 2020, although she has one that's a little bit newer right now. I just haven't taken a new picture. And the committee's work was to imagine what the phone situation is going to look like in 2033. I don't know how much you've thought about that, but were lots of websites that would predict what would be the skills our students would need. And one of those places said, these are going to be the top 10 skills that you will need this year. They've since updated this for 2028, and they will continue to update that. But if you look at the things on this list, they have a lot in common with the 8 mathematical practices and less in common with things that calculators can do, because we now have devices like my watch, which I guess is standing here being charged as we speak. The other thing that was in the front matter was a definition of what mathematical rigor is. I have a whole webinar on this. You can go to MCTM's YouTube channel and you can watch that. But mathematical rigor is in our classrooms. There's an equal intensity on conceptual understanding, which is the foundation of procedural skills and fluency and application. So about a third of our time is on each of those. If you continue to read within that vision statement, you will also see that it talks about that all the benchmarks in the future standards have 2 dimensions that overlay them. This year, I've been doing a webinar series on Dimension 1. Those are the math practices. This is the last webinar. Next year, I'll be doing a webinar series on Dimension 2, the benchmark context. And at the end of every benchmark, you will see something that says MP and a number. Those are the math practices that are most closely connected with that benchmark. Our job as educators is throughout students' K-12 experiences is to take all of the 8 math practices, and our job is to help students develop these practices to become effective mathematicians when they leave us after 12th grade. So we'll start in kindergarten, and with greater and greater levels of sophistication throughout all 13 years of the times that they're in our system, we will work to support students in developing all 8 of these. Today, since I've talked about all 8 of the math practices, today I'm going to give you some ideas of, at least 4 ideas of how you can support math practice implementation, either in your classroom, in your school, in your district. Whether you're a teacher or a leader, a teacher leader in this space, hopefully there'll be some ideas of how you can do that. Everything that I'm going to show you is in the folders. There will be a link put into the chat that will help you find where those things will be, and I'll share the code at the end as well. And a lot of these start with some work. We hired Minnesota author and artist Ben Orlin, not me, MCTM, the Minnesota Council of Teachers of Mathematics, hired him to create graphics to go along with each of the math practices. You might have gotten a peek at them in some of my later webinars, but for every math practice, he created an image to go along with that. Not only that, he wrote a sentence that says, if I was introducing this to students, here's the sentence I would say. So here's math practice 1, where our little dude here, if you don't know Ben's work, he has a series of books called Math with Bad Drawings, and it features these little stick drawings to explain mathematics, and he is making sense and persevering in solving. That's our first math practice, and he's admiring the mountain before him, and then you start a path and start hiking. Mountains don't climb themselves. It requires us to have perseverance. So for every single one of the 8 math practices, Ben created an image. I've shared the JPEGs of these with. I put them in a form that you can make a poster out of. I've made them into a 1-pager. All these things that you've seen, I took his images and I created things that you could use in your classroom to support your work, to support your memory and remembering what the 8 math practices are as you are looking at those. So they're pretty cool. You can come back and look at my slides and see them, but there are 8 images for the 8 math practices. One thing we can do with those images and the 8 math practices is there's somewhat of a hierarchy to these. And I've alluded to this in some of my previous webinars, but I really want to make that come alive for you. That image that I shared was one that Grace Kelmanek and Amy Lucenta had created, where they had thought about these 8 math practices in a certain way. So I took Ben's images and I recreated their graphic for Minnesota. And so the first picture in his graphic is really the umbrella of all of the 8 math practices. It's the goal. One of the misconceptions is people always start with this one. I think it's because it's numbered 1, but really it's the goal. And really it's the other ones that create students to have a sense of, can I persevere in solving these problems? If you look at the list of things that students who are proficient in math practice 1 learn to do, sometimes teachers will look at this list and get overwhelmed, because we know that in order to be good at this, these are things that we have to develop in them. And we're sometimes frozen because we're like, I'm looking at one of my classes and no one wants to do anything. And what do I do? And I'm hoping to give you some ideas in this, in how you can support your students in developing these. So I know what you're thinking. How do I create those conditions, Sarah? And I hope in the next 20 to 30 minutes, I can give you several ideas of how you can think about this. So here's the first idea of how you can do this. Remember our umbrella, that's the goal. Well, there are 3 of the practices, math practice 2, 7, and 8, that are called the pathways to math practice 1. They are the 3 that drive students towards developing the skills. When I saw this graphic, it really resonated with me, because for years in my own personal classroom, I had been working on math practice 7 and 8 during the first month of school. I found when I worked on those 2, like almost all the other things clicked into practice. I used a website from Fawn Win that's free called Visual Patterns. I talked about that in my Math Practice 7 and 8 series. And then with those, there are 4 other practices that are called the tools, the things that help us with each of those pathways, the things that drive us towards math practice 1s. In fact, we can think about this whole graphic backwards and say, if we start with students on these 4 math practices, helping them know what tools are available, modeling how to use them, supporting them in constructing viable arguments, really modeling for ourselves, but holding them to precision. with language that will support them in these three pathways, which are the doing of math, and ultimately will support them in making sense of problems and persevere in solving them. And so as we think about this, these four tools surround every single pathway. So a better graphic would be to have these four math practices surrounding every single one of those pathways, because we're using those almost every single day in the classroom to support students. So what are the four ways to support math practice implementation? Well, number one is, this is how I think every school should start. A few of you have done this with me, but a lot of you haven't yet. And that's to do an image sort. It's actually pretty quick. I've given you a one pager. Here's what it looks like. The first page are some quotes and some information from the 2022 standards about what the math practices are. But the real magic is on the second page. You can do this in 20 to 30 minutes. You could spend a whole hour on it. But really, it is just this one page where you're taking the 8 images from Ben Orlin and you're trying to match them to the 8 practices. So you give everybody some individual time to make sense of this. They compare their answers, and then you will find some discussion questions that they can use to talk about what those things. Now, some of you have done this with me. What is new is I'm also giving you an answer key to go along with it, a one pager that you could make a poster out of and put up in your classroom. But the first job, and I hope every educator and every leader and every special ed teacher who works with mathematics, anybody that works with mathematics, gets to know all 8 of these math practices. So an easy way to start is just by doing an image sort. By the way, if you want to do this electronically, I also put this image sort as a card sort into Desmos and shared a link with you in the folders of how you could use it that way. These math practices, again, describe the expertise that all of the people in the educational systems, not just the teacher, are seeking to develop in our students. That's how we create mathematicians, when they have these 8 skills in their life. We start in kindergarten, we keep working on it every year. So let's look at the second thing. The second thing you can do is, once you know what the 8 practices are, then you want to take them one at a time and start unpacking them. So if you look at the next one pager I'm going to give you, there are 8 of these, one for each of the math practices. This time, the one pager has a big paragraph that comes from the standards that describes the mathematical practice connected to Ben Orlin's images, and then 5 questions that you can use to unpack that image. I'm going to highlight 2 of those for you. I've done this with some other educators before. I'm going to show you what happened when I did this. I gave them a few minutes to annotate and read this paragraph. It's a dense paragraph. No one really wants to read it, but their job was to read the paragraph, pick out a phrase or a sentence, and connect it to Ben Orlin's picture. So one of the first groups I did this with said, "Oh, I like the phrase, they monitor and evaluate their progress," and they connected that to the little map that you see the little dude holding, and they evaluate where they are. Another person said, "Oh, I really picked up on the word solution pathways, that phrase, and thought about that as that path that is leading us. And we got to think about just where we start, the middle, and where the end is going to be when we get there." And at the end, they had highlighted several things from this paragraph that they saw in Ben's image. The second thing that I asked was, now look at the things that we didn't highlight. Is there something we could add to Ben's image to make it even better, to help us understand math practice 1? So somebody said, "Wow, we could put little sweat beads on their brow, and it's a lot of work, but I'm going to keep going anyways." Another person said, "When you solve part of the problem, there's always another mountain up in front, and that path keeps going on. Perseverance means we're going to keep going when we're done." This is a real life look at what that looked like when I unpacked this with other math leaders, and it was just a one-page document. You can spend 20, 30 minutes on this. You can spend an hour on it. There's 3 other questions that I'm not going to get into right now, but I have one of these pages for every single one of the 8 math practices. And so start small and start with one every 3 months or so, and really start to get to know these. Number 3, the third thing you can do to support implementation is every single one of these webinars, except the one I'm doing right now, all the previous 9 are up on MCTM's YouTube channel. They also come with a PLC protocol that's linked in the description. I've also put them in the folders. And so there is a playlist of these that I've linked to in all the links that I'm giving you. In fact, there's a folder called Idea 3. We're on Idea 3, and all the things I'm talking about for Idea 3 are in there. I also talked about Idea 1 and Idea 2. Previous to that, there's folders for those that include all the things that I've been talking about. So there's a playlist. And then there's a PLC protocol that can go along with that. That protocol, I have put together something you can do in about an hour. It includes watching the 30-minute recorded webinar. And so before you watch the webinar, there's about 10 minutes of pre-work that you can do. Ideally, you're doing this with at least one other person or a group. And you start by saying, showing a picture that I'm giving you. What do you notice? You record 12 ideas that they notice. You talk about what are math tools that you can think about. This webinar happens to be about Math Practice 5. You watch, by the way, this is the longest webinar, the 35-minute webinar. Some of them are shorter at 25 minutes. And then afterwards, there's 2 questions that you can go and spend some time discussing based on what you saw in the webinar. So that's ideas 1, 2, and 3. We got one more idea that I'm going to share with you, and then there's going to be a bonus one. And idea number 4 is to use the toolkits I put together. I don't know if you've looked at them. I'm going to talk about them and all the resources that I've given you for every single math practice. There's no reason that you can't do this. So I am giving you a link for all the original toolkits. So if you've never seen them, if you go into the folder that's titled Idea Folder 4, you will find these documents, and you will find all the original toolkits, one for each of the math practices. In those toolkits are a whole lot of things. The paragraph from the standards. It also comes with a K-12 progression of what it looks like in every single grade. Actually, it's a pre-K-12 progression of what that would look like. There's vignettes of what this practice looks like in the classroom. There's rubrics for your tasks and teachers. There's questions teachers can ask connected to these math practices. And then there's also a student rubric and things that you will see in students. And there's a whole bunch of other things. What I did for this webinar is I took all of those 8 toolkits and I took them apart and repackaged them so that all the K-12 progression documents for all 8 math practices were in one document. All 8 of the rubrics for teachers were in one document. All the student rubrics were in one document. I also gave a bonus of some family things that you can share on these 8 practices. And then I included some questions. There are also links for every single math practices. And I linked to each of these documents. You often have to scroll down past the PLC protocol. At the end of them, you will see this is for Math Practice 7. You will see there's several instructional routines you can apply to build this and create the conditions for this. Things I talked about in the webinar, but also things that I didn't talk about that you want to, if you want to go and learn a lot more about them. All of these things are also linked in a whole, like the Bible of this webinar series. And you can find all these things in session 10 folder. But you can also find them all linked to all the webinar recordings in this one document that you will find in that folder. So I'm going to end our time in the last 10 minutes or so with a bonus, because really I want you to see what this looks like in the classroom. If we were going to do all 8 math practices at once, in fact, and I don't think you should go into any lesson and think about all 8 of them at once. I think you should only be thinking about 1 or 2 or 3. But I'm going to show you with one task what that would look like, because the way that you're going to develop the 8 math practices is the only one way to learn math is for students to do math and for us to do math. And so we're going to do a little math together. I chose a problem because these math tasks are what are going to develop better than anything students' ability to build the 8 math practices. And so the math task, we always want to start with a rich task. I did give you 3 criteria for finding tasks that require problem solving. You want a problem solving something that is in the zone of proximal development for your students. And so there's 3 criteria for this. And this is the task that I have selected for today's webinar. We're just going to look at one task. This one I selected from UCubed. UCubed said this was a really great task for grades 3 through 9th grade. I really believe that is true. I did a similar problem every year in September when I was teaching 9th grade mathematics. And this problem is called the penny collection. It's super short. And here's what it says. Consider a collection of pennies with the following constraints. When the pennies are put in groups of 2, 3, 5, or 6, there is always 1 penny left over. When the pennies are put in groups of 7, there are no pennies left over. And the question is, how many pennies could there be? So this is a task that you would give to students and give them some time to work individually, have them work with a partner. And it's a task that I have found to be really doable for students. I went into the 2020 standards and benchmarks and looked for benchmarks. And all the way through from 2nd grade through 8th grade, I could find benchmarks that were connected to the math that is in this particular problem. So depending on what grade level they do this problem at, there's different things that would happen with them. One thing you might have in your just-in-time support set of tools as a teacher is helping them make sense of the reading of this. One thing that I do, I'm not going to just do it, but if I see students struggling, I'm going to have something ready to go. And so I'm going to talk about, when we're reading this, it talks about there's groups of 2. So I might give them like circular discs or actual pennies to play around with. And when we put them in groups of 2, there's always 1 left over. If we put them into groups of 3, there is also 1 left over. If we put them into groups of 5, there is also always 1 left over. And then I would let them explore with 6 and see that there was 1 left over. But if it's 7, then there's going to be no pennies left over. So a lot of students are going to need a concrete experience at the beginning. You're not going to tell them to have a concrete experience. You're going to let them explore first, but you're going to have some things ready to support them for just-in-time support in case it is needed. This task really highlights in K-5. By the way, I've included a lot of invisible slides that go into this for 6th through high school, but I'm going to concentrate right now on K-5. They might use skip counting and lists. They might need hands-on materials such as counters or number lines. Your students might make a table to keep track of things. They're going to be looking for patterns. This starts getting at least common multiple. It's okay if they don't know that word. They might be investigating that and playing around with it. You can actually solve this without even knowing that. And then they get a chance to practice. Remember, it starts with those 4 tools, 4 math practices that are tools. You're not going to just concentrate on them racing to get an answer to this. Along the journey of solving this problem, as a class and with partners, you're going to support students in constructing viable arguments. So students are going to explain why numbers that didn't work maybe don't fit that second constraint where the pennies are in groups of 7 with none left over. There's a lot of answers that students like, but it doesn't fit both constraints. Maybe you'll support them in modeling what they're doing with a table or a list, or saying, I'm wondering if there's a way that you might do this. Math Practice 5 allows us to use tools like counters and number lines in order to picture visually what's going on, help students attend to precision. Is the things they're doing, does it satisfy all the constraints? I've done this with 9th graders, and many of them struggle to make sure that it fits all the constraints, not just some of them. They get really excited that they've solved it. And so I never confirm or deny. I just ask questions that allow them to develop each of these practices. Then there's the pathways that get us to Math Practice 1, Math Practice 7, where they are looking for patterns in the numbers that do work and the things that don't work. By the way, there are many answers to this problem that do work. They look at the regularity in those, and they start to look at, it has to be one more than the least common multiple of 2, 3, 5, 6, but it's also got to be divisible by 7. And so they start looking at those things. Math practice 1 is they're willing to keep working and look for those solutions that fit all the constraints. And the last pathway is that they are really thinking both abstractly and quantitatively about this problem. So in 612, there's some other things they might bring to this problem to deepen it. Not all these things are needed, but they bring a greater sophistication to how students are using those things, because the goal in doing this task is we are creating the conditions not to tell people how to solve this problem, but for them to engage in solving it and us supporting their engagement. And I know you keep thinking, but Sara, you don't know my students in this one class. It's like, I am asking them, like, come on, pay attention, you can do this. And they just sit and do nothing. So how do you do that? Well, I also included for each of the math practices with this specific task, teacher moves of what you could do to build that math practice. I'm not going to show you all of them. You can go and look at my hidden slides if you want to see the other. For example, math practice 1, offer your students, have this as a just-in-time support, different entry points. So if they're struggling, give them some manipulatives that and say, perhaps you could use this, or, hey, I wonder if you could organize your thinking with a table, maybe encourage skip counting with pairs of students. A lot of the teacher moves are connected to the questioning that we have. So for math practice 3, constructing viable arguments, when students say, is this correct? I will say back to them, how do you know your answer is correct? Can you prove it or disprove it? And I will walk away and give them space with a partner to think about that and work on that. They need space to work on it and support that when they're doing this. Ask them about what tools. Do you notice any patterns in the number of the work? That's my number one question always, every day in my class. Math is the study of patterns and relationships. And so I'll go through that. And so each of these things, perhaps at the end of the solving it, you reflect on how did we stay persistent as a way of building that skill. So for each of these things, I'm giving you strategies and different things that you can do to do this problem. The only way to learn math is to do math. And so this particular task and most rich tasks give you the opportunity to build 1 or 2 or 3 or several of these. Don't worry about doing all 8 at the same time, but there's an opportunity for students to practice that with a good rich task. So to sum up everything that I've been talking about in this webinar series, how do we create the conditions for Minnesota students? I've given you 4 specific things you can do at your school or in your district, ideally with at least one other person to support deepening the learning of all the educators in the system around this. I've given you a bonus of what this looks like with a math task, and you can go and dig into my slides and look for other things that you can learn from those. I also just would be remiss if I didn't highlight a couple of the reasons teachers are hesitant to focus on things that I've been hearing. I've been hearing from teachers, as have other leaders, that how can students make sense of the problems when half of my students are multilingual learners and they can't read English? Hey, don't worry. That's been my whole teaching career for over 30 years. I did a webinar in October. I have 2 more coming up in May. I'm going to do more next year on how you support multilingual learners in the classroom. And honestly, these are good ideas for everyone. So hopefully you'll come to my webinar series in May. Pay attention to MCTM. It's either up to sign up now or will be soon. The other thing that I hear a lot is that students need to be fluent with their facts before they can do any of these. This starts in kindergarten. They don't know their facts in kindergarten. These are things that we can build despite what is going on with them. These can be done simultaneously. This is accelerated learning. Don't ignore these thinking you got to solve other problems first. So our 3 things that we need to do are create the conditions for students to engage in the MPs. I want to encourage you to start small, work on just 1 or 2 a year. This spring, this month, maybe all you're going to do is pick what's the one that we're going to work on this spring. Don't worry about solving all of them. Really go deep with one of them is better than thinking about all 8 of them at once. And then a fun thing you can do, let's say you chose attending to precision. Start catching the adults in the system. Maybe your principal puts up a really great graph with great axes labeled and everything. And you can say, hey, principal, you were doing math practice number blank. You were attending to precision, and start naming it and catching people. Everything that I shared with you today is in the folders that you will see. I have given you this bit.ly and this QR code. You will see in the chat the links that have been shared with you. Please utilize these. I will be doing a session on this up at MCTM where I have an hour, and I'll talk a little slower and we'll do a little bit of stuff together. I'm also going to be doing a free one-day training this summer on that. You'll hear more about that later this month. So thank you. If you hit all 10 of these webinars, you're amazing. If you hit 5 of them, you're also amazing. And if this is your first one, you are also amazing. Thank you guys for coming. I need to get going to another meeting, but you can stay on if you want. Kim Bartman is here along with some other leaders. They're happy to answer your questions, give you my email address if you need it, and answer things. But I'm going to stop the recording here.